People Get Ready by Curtis Mayfield. People get ready. I think it's about time. It's 48. Time for the speakers? 8:48, that is. It's not 48 o'clock. We're not on a 2-day military. You ready? Ready for this lead speaker now? Still waiting.
We can't find this.
Okay, so when I was thinking about, when I was given the commission, the instructions to find songs with a revolutionary theme, I was thinking about songs that were serious and songs that were fun. And one song that popped into my head, thinking about the Tea Party, the original Tea Party, not the one from 15 years ago, was Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation. Anybody old enough to remember that as a hit song?
Yeah. Yes.
So there must be some people who are 50 years old or 60 years old here, besides on the bandstand. Sorry, I'm just recovering from a little bit of a respiratory ailment here. So this is a song that was a hit. It was a kind of an oddball song that in a style called soca, I believe, soul calypso. That was a pop hit in the about 1972. It's called "Rock the Boat." Rock the Boat. Let me see if I can get my flashlight set up here so that I can both play and play the notes.
Oh, we're on. All
See
right.
the speaker? Punch speak right in front of the monument. And the lady is signing on the politician.
So, you folks know Rhinestone Cowboy?
What?
Huh? I'm ready.
What?
Oh, I am ready. I've been walking these streets so long, singing the same old song. Oh, later. Let's stick around. That's a little later. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate 250 years of fighting back against bullies. All right? If you don't like bullies, you love the American Revolution. I think I know this, but I'm going to use a cheat sheet just in case. These are the times that tried men's and women's, they didn't say that back then, souls. Oh, I knew I didn't have it all. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he and she that stands by it now deserves the love and the thanks of man and woman. That was Thomas Paine, almost one full year after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, 1 year after Paul Revere's ride, 1 year after the famous battle on our turf in Bunker Hill. And that is a call to action. It's not a partisan call to action. It's not an indication of anything going on in our country anymore. What Thomas Paine was asking the American people to do was to make a decision. Because there's only been a few times in our country's great history where we have been divided. In the winner of those fights, it's always been a third. At that time, 1/3 of this country were loyalists. 1/3 of this country was patriots. 1/3 of that country, of our country, was standing on the sidelines until they burned down the town of Charlestown. And George Washington and his great Virginians said, and this is a quote, if they can do this in Boston, they can do it to us. So I'm not asking you to take a side on any political, you just get involved. Just get involved. And then we just let the chips fall where they may. And Paul is on his way. So I guess Paul Revere is coming this way.
see the horse.
All right, my name is Steven. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be narrating some of the events as they're happening tonight, as our reenactors make their way through the park, just so everyone gets a chance to hear what's going on and get the full context of Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. John Larkin and Colonel Conan, these are friends of Paul Revere here. They have brought the horse that Paul is going to ride. You'll see another horse and rider as well, because Paul was not the only rider this night 250 years ago. So far, Paul has been busy. First, he instructed a friend to hang 1 or 2 lanterns in the Old North Church, though it wasn't so old then, as a signal for the movements of the British Army. This signal had been prearranged with many others in Charlestown in case he was unable to escape Boston himself, so others could still carry his message. After, he was quietly rowed over to Charlestown, past the HMS Somerset, which lurked in the dark waters of the Charles River. You'll not be hearing him shout, "The British are coming" tonight, for 2 reasons. First, everyone was British. The revolution hadn't started yet. Second, this was a mission of utmost secrecy. The army patrolled the streets of Boston and Charlestown, and many of Paul Revere's fellow colonists were still loyal to the Empire. Paul was not alerting everyone, but rather a network of co-conspirators to prevent the arrest of key leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and protect the stores of arms and gunpowder. Now, as Paul arrives, he confirms with Larkin and Conan that they have seen the signal, the 2 lanterns in the church tower. This means the army plans to move by sea across the Charles River into Cambridge, rather than march by land over Boston Neck. As Paul takes the horse from Larkin and Conan, they remind him to move quietly and avoid the patrols that will stop him if he is caught. This mission was especially risky for Paul, as this wasn't his first ride to warn others of the army's movements. For example, 4 months ago, Paul had traveled 40 miles to Portsmouth through bitter wind and deep snow because he and others had mistakenly thought that British regulars were being sent to reinforce Fort William and Mary. Now, I don't know how many of you here tonight have ridden a horse, but I'm sure you can imagine how difficult that journey would be without a windshield, interior heating, paved roads, all the modern luxuries. Paul's warning led to colonists seizing the arms and powder from the skeleton garrison of only 6 men. Sometimes this is called the shot not heard around the world. Eventually, in response to the colonists' attack, the British would reinforce the fort, as Paul had warned, but by the time they arrived, the guns and powder had long since been spirited away. Because of this, the British were keeping a close eye on Paul and his movements. His missions were so well known that his name had even been circulated in London newspapers. Now, as we return to the scene in front of us, as the 3 men talk, there is some tension in the air. They are about to subvert the will of one of the most powerful armies, if not the most powerful army on Earth. And that army knows who Paul is. They are patrolling these very streets, and it is a long road to Lexington and Concord. You may notice that neither Larkin nor Conan are riding this night. Given the circumstances, they may be making the more sane decision. Later, other members of this network, the Sons of Liberty, would comment on a number of Paul's exceptional qualities, including a steady perseverance, a trait he had to rely on heavily given his risky nightlife. Although Paul was confident he could outmaneuver and outride the British patrols, let's remember that he did not ride alone this night. Making it to Charlestown had been a feat in of itself, and many assumed Paul would not have been able to make it out of Boston, hence the need for the signal in the church towers. So others had been looking for this signal and would be riding out on their own to sound the alarm. We may not remember the names of all these other men who rode for liberty 250 years ago, but each, like Paul, was filled with bravery, courage, and a rebellious spirit. We will hear briefly about 2 of these men later, but for the moment, we'll return to the scene in front of us, as we are about to watch Paul go off, sent off by Larkin and Conan.
One officer with the Cambridge side. The patrols have been seen in this area. We'll send more riders out, Paul. You're not alone tonight. Godspeed, my friend. Hold on.
Now, as Paul rode out that night, he would later narrowly avoid capture in Charlestown before altering his planned route to arrive in Medford instead and alert the militia there. He would then ride on through Montomi, now called Arlington, before arriving in Lexington just after midnight. There, he would meet William Dawes, another one of the many riders that night, and the two would continue on to Concord to meet a third rider, Dr. Samuel Prescott, along the way. Soon, all three were intercepted by a patrol. While Prescott and Dawes managed to escape, Paul was caught and had his horse confiscated. Alone and on foot, he would return in Lexington just in time to witness the end of the battle there. That is the story of Paul Revere as it happened this night 250 years ago. Different perhaps from how you've heard it told before. Now, I hope you all stay a little bit longer. We have a few more speakers coming up, including Joe Bagley, who will be talking about how these events would ultimately shape Charlestown's past and present landscape. So give a big hand for Joe Bagley here, folks.
So as we bid Revere a fond farewell, I wish to share the story of what happened on April 19th, tomorrow, and the vital, tragic role Charlestown played in the battles of Lexington and Concord. By 10 a.m. on April 19th, news of the shot heard round the world in Lexington had reached Charlestown. The people of Charlestown were terrified of what had begun that day, and still others joined together to head west in support of the militia. By the afternoon, a letter from British General Thomas Gage had reached Charlestown, warning that he was aware of Charlestown's residents joining the battle in Lexington and Concord, and if a single additional man left their home armed, there would be a disagreeable consequence. As the retreating British troops fled east from Lexington and Concord, they were pursued by more than 4,000 Massachusetts militiamen. During the march, word again reached Charlestown of the destruction of a Cambridge bridge. This would have allowed the battered British troops to flee back to their stronghold in Boston through Alston and Brighton. But now, without the bridge, the only escape route back to Boston was through Charlestown. With this knowledge, panic spread amongst the residents of Charlestown. The King's troops were coming, bloodied, angry, and about to reach a dead end in their town, surrounded by families and friends of the militiamen who had just fought them. Just before sunset, around 7 p.m. on April 19th, the British regulars reached Charlestown Neck, the place we now call Sullivan Square. Just west of there is now East Somerville, stood Charlestown's Common. The Common was a large open space where the residents of Charlestown kept their cows and sheep in pasture. Fearing the worst, residents of Charlestown had already begun to flee the town, throwing their families and whatever they could grab into carts, and racing northwest towards the Neck. They were trying to get out of town and into Medford and beyond before they were cut off by the returning troops. When the British troops reached Charlestown Common, they began firing on the fleeing men, women, and children of Charlestown. The following story comes from an account of Charlestown resident Jacob Rogers. Like many in town, Jacob had heard the news of the coming troops and raced home near his home on Charlestown Schoolhouse, today near the playground on Harvard Mall. He gathered his wife Anne and their children and headed towards Main Street. There, he stopped another fleeing family and convinced them to take his children into their cart. As his cart rolled north with the couple's children, Jacob returned to get his horse so that he and Anne could follow behind. As Jacob and Anne rode northwest towards the Neck, one of his neighbors came racing towards them from the Common. He seized the reins of Jacob's horse, shouting that the troops had entered the Common and the escape route out of Charlestown was closing. Having no idea if their children had made it out of town safely, they were forced to turn away from the Neck and headed up Bunker Hill Street instead. At the top of the hill, Jacob tied his horse to a post next to his wife's father's house. There, Anne's sisters joined them. No sooner had he done this, he noticed that the British regulars were now just 600 feet down the hill, marching towards them. Another neighbor, Daniel Haley, along with his wife, brushed past Jacob, Anne, and Anne's sisters. Daniel charged towards the troops with his guns raised, drawing a volley of musket fire from the regulars. Jacob, Anne, and her sisters fled on foot, running southeast away from the King's troops, away from their Neck, and away from their children. They ran southeast past the farm fields on Bunker's Hill under fire, expecting at any moment to be shot dead. Seeking protection as night was falling around them, they joined many others fleeing towards the pest house, which was on the shore, and the boats that could flee town. This was the same location where Revere had arrived by boat the night before from the north end. They followed a small street up over Breed's Hill, a place that just 58 days later would be the center of the bloodiest battle in the American Revolution, and then they reached the training field. There they heard women's voices coming out of the house of Samuel Townsend. Entering the home, they found terrified men, women, and children of Charlestown. After resting, Jacob left Anne at Townsend's house and headed back towards the center of town, where we now stand, hoping to get back to his home. Jacob had heard from another neighbor that when the king's troops reached the center of town, they warned women and children to stay inside their homes for their safety and begged drinks from the residents of Charlestown. Too afraid of what the armed men would do if they refused, many provided troops with water, wine, and beer. Jacob and another man, Samuel Carey, went out to the Three Cranes Tavern, which used to stand just here in this park, where many British officers had gathered, in tumult and confusion, demanding drink. Jacob waited outside, and finding things generally quiet, he headed back to his home, where eventually he met up again with his wife and sisters. Tragically, when they had all returned home, Anne had received word that her brother, Edward Barber, just 14 years old, had been shot and killed by the British troops after leaning out of a window to watch the soldiers arrive. Later that night, Jacob walked back down Main Street, where he found a British soldier stationed near the intersection of Green and Main Streets. Today, the site of the public library. The guard remained at this post all night. The next day, Jacob ventured out of Charlestown in search of his children. It was not until the following night, April 20th, that he finally found them. Jacob's children and the family that had ridden out of Charlestown were fired upon by the king's troops as they fled past Charlestown Common. Once they had gotten far enough north, the children fled from house to house in complete terror. Jacob eventually found them safe at the home of Daniel Waters in Malden, 4 miles north of Charlestown. Over the next few days, many of the troops withdrew from Charlestown back to Boston. Fearing war was now inevitable, those who were still in town began to pack their homes and flee to places further from the troops. Compensation claims submitted after the Battle of Bunker Hill reference April 19th as the beginning of their losses in the Revolutionary War, as the king's troops helped themselves to the things hastily left behind by fleeing residents. By the time of the Battle of Bunker Hill, 58 days later, only about 10% of the roughly 2,000 residents of Charlestown remained in their homes. Those who stayed were finally forced to flee when the British set fire to the town on June 17, 1775. The events of April 18th and 19th were the start of the American Revolution and the events that would forever reshape the town of Charlestown. Thank you. Back to Dan Ryan.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate our history. I want to thank Joe Bagley from the city of Boston. Many years ago, this park that we're standing in here had a giant highway over it. And the good people of Charlestown, when they started to do the big dig and all that other stuff that was going to make Boston beautiful, they did an archaeological dig here to preserve our history, to teach our children, to teach future generations what the men and women from the Revolutionary period did to create the greatest democracy in the world. And Joe Bagley is preserving that history. Thank you. And I know we have a lot of Bruins, Celtics, Patriots fan out here. Son, we only have one undefeated team in the city of Boston, and that is the United States Constitutional Alliance. That's Commander Schaefer. Woo! Never lost a battle, never will. I think that wooden ship could still beat half the countries in the world. What do you think? I also have some friends here with me Gigi Gabriella Coletta from the Boston City Council. Ruthie Lucienne, do I have it yet? Ruthie, City Council President. Senator and a colleague who represents Charlestown, Sal DiDomenico. State Representative Kate Donahue, who I work with all the time. She has probably knocked more doors for Democrats than anyone in the country. And after a lifetime of service to other elected officials, he decided to run for office and is now a state representative with me. Thank you, Kate. I want to thank the Preservation Society for bringing us all here and for what they do. Amanda Zetto, Noel, and the whole rest of the crew. And what else do we have? Is that it? We're done? So they wanted me to ride with Paul Revere, but they didn't have a Clydesdale available. And I don't care how treacherous his ride was, he's never done Sullivan Square during rush hour. But anyway, peace be with you all. Happy weekend. Let's celebrate what it is we've had here for 250 years. Just keep paying attention. And it will continue. It will continue. We've been through worse. We have been through worse. And we will unite, we will stay together. And as John Winthrop said, Charlestown in Boston will continue, in Massachusetts, will continue to be a shining city upon a hill. That's what we celebrate here today. Go have fun. Go try to find Paul Revere or some of the Minutemen. Love you all. Thank you, Boston. Thank you, United States of America. Love being here.